Shannon Kennedy stood in front of the bedroom mirror, her slender, naked body visible and her shoulder-length hair wet from a recent shower. The house had become eerily quiet now that Patrick had left for work, and she was left all alone. Moreover, she felt disappointed and empty. It didn't make sense considering the events that had just happened. Patrick had just shown her that he loved her, so she was supposed to feel satisfied. Standing in the bedroom, Shannon allowed her thoughts to wander back to the memory of 1 hour ago. Patrick joined her in the shower before heading to his shift at the hospital, and like many nice things, she didn't expect this to happen. She was almost finished rinsing off when she heard the shower door open behind her. She turned around and saw her naked husband entering the shower and closing the door behind him. It had been at least a month since Patrick had made love to her, so seeing his beautiful body in front of her sent a ripple through her own body. However, she made the disturbing observation that the sight of him naked was no longer as erotic as it had been at the beginning of their relationship. This observation caused a dull, unpleasant feeling of fear to rise in her stomach, which she quickly ignored, focusing her attention back on her husband. When Patrick approached Shannon, he hugged her and kissed her passionately. He supported her head with his hands while he stroked her hair, and the kisses became more and more passionate, and they both became more and more excited. Eventually, Shannon pulled away from him and buried her face in his neck. "I missed you, baby. I missed you so much," she said regretfully. "I missed you too. Look down and you will see how much I missed you." Shannon looked down and indeed saw that Patrick was excited and waiting for her. Shannon reached down and began to caress. Then they moved on to sex. He then pulled out of her and quickly kissed her on the lips. "I better get ready for work," he said. "Patrick..." Shannon started to say something but wasn't quite sure what it was. Did she want him to stay? Did she want him to continue making love to her? Why did she suddenly feel disappointed? Before she could think of anything to say, he got dressed and walked out the door. She had just made perfect love with her perfect husband, but now she was left alone. She climbed out of the shower, padded into the carpeted master bedroom, and stood in front of the full-length mirror. It reflected a beautiful, slender woman in her early 20s, a woman who felt empty and confused. She met Patrick 8 years ago when she fell through the glass coffee table she was stupidly dancing on at a party. She got away with superficial cuts from the glass, but needed surgery for a broken ankle, and her surgeon was Patrick. "So no drunken dancing on glass tables, okay?" he said jokingly when Shannon's ankle had healed and she was cleared to go home. "No strenuous exercise for at least 6 weeks, no driving for 4 weeks. Oh, and if you need company, here's my number." He handed her a small piece of paper on which he scribbled his name and phone number. 2 weeks later, they started dating, and 3 years later, they got married. They were so in love with each other for the first 4 years. Those first years were full of hope, happiness, romantic dates, and wild, passionate sex. Shannon had never been happier at that time in her life, but the last 2 years had been hard. They tried their best to get pregnant but were unsuccessful, and the absence of a child in their lives left Shannon despondent. She went to an elementary school where she worked as a teacher and interacted with many wonderful children, desperately wanting to have one of them. It was terribly cruel. Problems with the pregnancy began to cause friction between her and Patrick. They couldn't help but blaming each other, and disappointment began to kill their sex drive. The wild, hot sex that used to happen daily dropped to 3 times a week, to once a week, and eventually became once every 2 weeks, if it happened at all. Sex had become such a rarity lately that the shower incident had really taken her by surprise. It wasn't just because he wanted her, it was the ferocity with which he took her. There was simply no such energy in their sex life anymore. It seemed like he was trying to send her some kind of message. It was as if he was trying to tell her that he missed her, that she was still his. She received this message loud and clear, and it was incredibly intense. However, standing naked in their bedroom, next to their marital bed, she now felt empty, and empty, as if something important was missing. She remembered how he quickly came out, quickly kissed her, and just as quickly left for work. There was something depressing about how quickly he left. This left her feeling used and unfulfilled. As much as the sex was passionate and warm and loving, It also ended too quickly, and she was worried about how quickly Patrick could disconnect from her. Her phone vibrated and she saw a message from her best friend, Natalie Campbell, whom she knew from school. "Hello, girl. Tammy is having a party at her house tonight. Lots of people from school. Tammy wants you there. Bring the tequila. I love you, girlfriend." Natalie was with her throughout. She helped Shannon survive her first breakup and her parents' divorce in the 10th grade. Natalie was Shannon's maid of honor, and she held her hand every time Patrick and Shannon fought. Tammy Hart was another girl Shannon and Natalie had known since high school, the three women having been closely bonded as sisters throughout their youth. A night out with the girls seemed like the perfect cure for Shannon's despondency. She quickly responded to the text message, her fingers flying as she typed, "I'll be there with tequila." Sheng. A small smile appeared on her face as she sent the message. Natalie was always the life of the party, and she knew exactly how to lift Shannon's spirits. She had a strong feeling that the evening spent with friends would be successful. She threw the phone on the bed and walked towards the dressing room with an excited step. It's time to get dressed and dance all night. When she arrived at Tammy Hart's house, the music was loud and people were already drunk. People danced on the front porch, others kissed on the porch and huddled together talking. She smiled at those she passed and walked through the open door to find Tammy and Natalie waiting for her in the kitchen. She was nearly knocked over by Natalie, who had her black hair tied up in a bun on top of her head. She wore a tight dress that showed off her figure and told everyone how well-versed she was in fashion. As Natalie hugged her, Shannon smelled alcohol on her breath, and it made her laugh. "Yeah, I love you too, Nat," Shannon said in greeting as Natalie kissed her on the cheek. "It's been so long, baby," Natalie said. Her voice was cheerful and a little drunk. "I'm here now, honey," Shannon replied, handing Natalie the tequila she had brought. "Yes, you are here?" Tammy exclaimed enthusiastically, taking out 3 shot glasses. "What are we drinking to?" Natalie asked, pouring 3 shots of tequila. Shannon sighed. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe we'll drink so that I find a new husband." The words came out suddenly from Shannon as the 2 girls looked at her in surprise, the tequila momentarily forgotten in Shannon's moment of despair. "Shen?" Natalie asked softly. "What happened?" Tammy asked. Shannon just shook her head and tried not to cry. "It's just really not going well with Patrick and I. We're just so far apart lately." Shannon covered her face with her hands and Natalie hugged her. "Everything will be fine," she continued. "I just think I need to get really drunk and forget I'm married for one night." Immediately, a huge, mischievous smile spread across Natalie's face. "Sounds like a great idea," she replied as Tammy handed out the shots. "For a night without husbands," Tammy said, holding up her tequila glass. Natalie and Shannon followed their friend's example, and together they drank for the night without their husbands. A few hours later, Shannon felt well for the first time in a long time. Tammy's living room was full of drunken, dancing bodies. Shannon twirled and twirled to the beat of a Michael Jackson song and felt very far away from the unhappiness of her marriage. She had just spent the last 4 songs dancing and laughing with Tammy and Natalie, but now she didn't know where they had gone. She continued to dance, knowing that she would eventually find them. "I like your moves." She looked around, not quite sure where the voice was coming from. She drank so much that the room began to appear blurry. The hand on her shoulder held her steady, and she stopped dancing to look at the man who was talking to her. "I said, I like your moves," the man said. He was tall, strong, and stood with a posture that Shannon associated with confidence. Shannon smiled and shrugged shyly. "Thanks, I'm just improvising." The stranger laughed, took her hand, and began to dance with her. "In that case, you should continue." They danced until the end of the song, and Shannon found that he had a good rhythm and was fun to dance with. As the next song began, he turned her around, and her body felt light and carefree. The way this man moved with her was enticing, and as she spent more and more time with him, she began to notice that he was incredibly attractive. After the 3rd song, he took her hand and led her to one of the sofas in the living room. It was now the early morning hours, and the house was slowly starting to empty. As Shannon sat down on the couch, she thought about Tammy and Natalie and wondered if they had fallen asleep somewhere or were perhaps still hanging out. The stranger she was dancing with sat down next to her and put his hand on her knee. "I'm Connor Sloan," he said with a small smile. "I'm Shannon Kennedy," she replied, feeling the comfortable weight of his hand on her knee. "I'm best friends with Natalie Campbell. I went to school with her and Tammy Hart." He nodded to show he understood, but Shannon had a sneaking suspicion that it wasn't that important for Connor to know why she was at the party. He seemed just glad that she came to the party at all, and that she sat on the couch with him. "Wow, you've known them both for so long. I'm one of Tammy's work colleagues. I just started working with her last month. I'm really glad I met her, if all her parties are this fun." He spoke with the confidence of a professional public speaker. His voice was so powerful that it seemed to force Shannon to listen to him. His voice was deep and sexy, and had the ability to turn her on. Suddenly, Shannon became very conscious of her marital status. It was easy to tell the girls she wanted a night away from Patrick. Easy to drink shot after shot of tequila and dance all night. But getting cozy with another guy really wasn't the plan. She looked at Connor's hand on her knee and was about to move it away, forming the words in her head to tell him that she was married. At the last moment, however, she foolishly decided not to. What's the harm in dancing with a guy and talking to him? After all, she wasn't planning on sleeping with him or anything like that. "You seem very thoughtful," Connor noted. "Oh no, I'm just tired. But I gotta tell you, tonight was really fun." Connor laughed, a beautiful sound that Shannon could listen to forever. "Oh my God, so much fun, right?" he answered with agreement. "I've had a really busy week at work, so something like this was just what I needed. Good drinks, good conversation, and a fun dance with a stunningly beautiful woman. I'll have to thank Tammy for the invitation." Shannon couldn't help but blush. She hadn't been complimented in a long time, and hearing this gorgeous man call her stunningly beautiful made her heart race. "Stunningly beautiful? Thank you. That really means a lot," she said, taking the hand that was on her knee and squeezing it gently. He returned the squeeze of her hand and looked into her eyes with a soft smile. She responded with a smile, and they sat like that for several minutes in comfortable silence. As she looked at him, she noticed that his eyes were bright blue, a shade she had never seen before. She had a strange feeling that if she wasn't careful, she might get lost in the blue of his eyes. It was a scary feeling, so scary that she let go of his hand and moved away a little. Connor must have noticed the change in Shannon's behavior because his brow furrowed in concern. "Are you okay?" he asked tenderly. Shannon shook her head and covered her face with her hands. "I feel so stupid, Connor. You're so beautiful, and I had so much fun with you tonight, but I really feel bad sitting here with you, holding your hand. I'm married. Sorry, I should have said sooner. You were just so nice in the dance, I'm sorry if I misled you." Disappointment washed over Connor's face, but he remained next to her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Hey, it's okay. We just danced and held hands briefly. I wouldn't say it was cheating or anything. Although I have to admit I'm disappointed. I was trying to figure out the best way to kiss you, but now it probably won't happen." "No, it probably won't happen," Shannon answered with an ironic smile. "Anyway, it's late," Connor said, pointing to the clock on the wall, which showed it was almost 3 in the morning. Shannon nodded in agreement. "Yes, I have to go. Listen." Suddenly, she realized that she didn't want to say goodbye to Connor. She knew she was married, and what she was asking was probably inappropriate, but she didn't want this to be the last time they saw each other. "If you think it's inappropriate, I'll understand, but I'd like you to have my number. I know I'm married, but I'd still like to be friends." Connor stood there for a moment, as if considering her offer. "Friends? Of course. I don't think it's inappropriate." He took out his phone, and they exchanged numbers. Then he kissed her on the cheek and thanked her for the dance. When he left Tammy's house, Shannon felt a surge of adrenaline in her body, but she couldn't understand why. Connor and her were only friends, but for some reason, There seemed to be something behind it that she couldn't quite see yet. Shannon collapsed on the couch, drunk and exhausted. It was a fun night, and fun was something she hadn't felt in a long time. As she fell asleep, she thought briefly about Patrick and how much she still loved him. Then she thought about Connor and wondered if he had made it home and if he was thinking about her. The last thought before sleep took over was the memory of Natalie and Tammy drinking tequila with her before the party really started. She may not have had the perfect marriage, but she definitely had the perfect friends. The day after Tammy's party, Shannon felt that things between her and Patrick were worse than she first realized. When Patrick returned from his shift at the hospital, Shannon tried to kiss him, but he simply walked past her as if he was too busy to caress. Shannon felt rejected, but decided not to make a big deal out of it. She decided she was thinking too much. Later that day, Shannon put on lacy lingerie and casually walked over to the chair in which he was sitting. She ran her fingers through his hair while her other hand gently stroked her thigh. However, he pushed her hand away and said that he was too tired to make love right now. Annoyed, she sighed and left in a rage. "What is your problem?" Patrick shouted with irritation. "What's my problem, Patrick? Are you kidding me? My problem is you. You don't want me anymore." Shannon screamed in anger. "Shannon, we made love yesterday." "Yes, after a month of waiting," Shannon retorted. "Not to mention how you could do this. Fast run away from me after that. Darling, I need you. Don't you find me attractive anymore?" "Of course you are attractive, Shen." "Then show me how much you want me," Shannon begged, taking his hands. Patrick looked at her in her lace bra and thong, but he just wasn't feeling it. He shook his head and let go of her hands. "Sorry, Shen. Not right now. Come on," Shannon replied angrily, leaving the room. When she left him, Patrick felt like a failure, but he couldn't help the way he felt. He had really been having a hard time getting aroused by his wife lately. Sex became boring and ordinary, except for that one time in the shower. Patrick knew that shower sex happened out of guilt. He thought about asking Shannon for a divorce. He even fantasized about cheating on Shannon. He was so filled with guilt that he decided to fuck Shannon's brains out as a form of apology. So when he found her in the shower, he had sex with her like never before. The only problem was that he didn't think he had it in him to continue making love to her like this. When he saw her in sexy lingerie, he didn't even get aroused by the sight of her. All he saw was a boring, desperate woman who couldn't give him a child. Patrick heard the front door slam shut and knew his wife had left the house. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes and found himself thinking about Phoebe Rhodes. Phoebe was one of the operating room nurses at the hospital that Patrick had the pleasure of working with. She was similar in build to Shannon, but a little curvier with full D-cup breasts and wide hips. In contrast to Shannon's long blonde hair, she had short brown hair. Phoebe was sexy and exciting in a way that Shannon was not. Phoebe was 23 and fresh out of medical school. He liked her age best. He was 42, and he liked the idea of having a relationship with a young girl like Phoebe. Patrick had a suspicion that Phoebe thought the same about him, since she often flirted with him at work. She walked past him in the hospital, as if walking on a catwalk, swaying her hips. When she passed him, she winked at him and touched him lightly. There were rumors at the hospital that Phoebe had a soft spot for the senior surgeons. Patrick just so happened to have a soft spot for sexy young nurses. Shannon got into her purple Volkswagen and drove away from the house in a state of rage. She had had enough of trying to make Patrick attractive and had enough of feeling unappreciated in a relationship that had once been full of love and happiness. Shannon still loved her husband and desperately wanted to rekindle their sex life, but right now she couldn't stand being around him. The memory of Patrick shaking his head and pushing her away while she stood in front of him in sexy lingerie played on repeat in her head and made her tremble with anger. How dare he neglect her like that? How could he forget that she is his wife and his mistress, someone to be treated passionately? How could he make her feel like this? She thought about all this as she walked aimlessly around the city, not knowing where to go. After taking several wrong streets and making an illegal U-turn, Shannon discovered that she had accidentally ended up in the same neighborhood where Tammy lived. She pulled into the parking lot of Kingston Reserve, which was a popular park with a beautiful lake that was home to many ducks. When she turned off the ignition, she allowed the anger to wash out of her, and suddenly she began to cry. The tears continued to fall as she thought about Patrick and how much she wanted him to want her, and was filled with horror as she allowed herself to think the unthinkable. What if things don't work out? What if my marriage ends? The thought of her marriage ending was so terrible that it made her cry even harder, the tears leaving her face messy and blotchy. Once she began to cry, she found that she could not stop and sat there for half an hour, letting her despair flow from her soul. She had been strong for so long, hoping that things would improve in their marriage, but today, Shannon saw a sign of defeat in Patrick's eyes. Patrick was losing interest in marriage, and this made her feel worthless. As she sat there crying, she heard a light tapping on her car window and looked up to see a pair of familiar blue eyes that belonged to Connor. When he looked at her, his face was full of friendly concern. Shannon quickly wiped her face, opened the door, and got out of the car to greet him. When she did, he wrapped his arms around her in a warm embrace. "Shannon, what happened?" he asked, holding her face in his hands and searching her eyes for answers. Shannon started to answer, but instead started crying again. Connor took her into his arms and stroked her hair as she cried. "It's okay. It's okay." He soothed her gently as she sobbed into his chest. She couldn't remember the last time she cried so uncontrollably. The feeling of rejection and worthlessness was so deep, it was frightening. Eventually, however, the sobbing subsided, and Shannon was able to take a few deep breaths as Connor rubbed her back soothingly. "So what happened?" Connor asked, leading her to a bench opposite the lake. As they sat down on the bench, several ducks came over to where they were sitting. "I had a fight with my husband," Shannon said with a sigh, crossing her arms over her chest. "He doesn't want me anymore," she said, wiping away a single tear running down her cheek. Connor placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and pulled her closer to him. "Come on, Shannon. How can you be so sure of that?" he realized. Shannon snuggled close to Connor and rested her head on his shoulder. She instantly felt the calm that she had been missing in her life. "I know because he pushed me away," she replied. "Is it true?" Connor asked, genuinely surprised. He couldn't believe that someone would push away a girl like Shannon. "Really, I'm serious. I wore the sexiest lace lingerie I own and tried to seduce him today. He didn't want me. He rejected me. He doesn't find me attractive anymore." She started crying again, and Connor pressed her to him, softly stroking her hair, feeling only anger towards Patrick, although he had never met this man and had only recently met Shannon. Feeling so good on that park bench, just being in Connor's arms, was something special. His arms were strong and his embrace was warm, filling her with a sense of security. "I just can't believe it," Connor said. "What can't you believe?" Shannon asked softly, lying relaxed in Connor's arms. "That he rejected you like that. You are so incredibly sexy. If you were my wife, I would never reject you," he said sadly. It was hard for him to hold her when all he wanted to do was kiss her. He hated that Patrick did this to her and made her feel so rejected. After a while, Shannon stood up to look him in the eyes. They were almost the color of the sky. His eyes were soothing to look into, and again, she felt the sensation of being lost in them. The last time this happened at Tammy's house, the feeling scared her. Today on the park bench, she was not afraid. On the contrary, she took his hands in hers, and his touch was warm and pleasant. As they held hands and looked into each other's eyes, Connor reached his hand to her right cheek and stroked it gently. She closed her eyes at his touch as he gently stroked her skin. She kept her eyes closed for a few moments so she didn't see Connor lean in, and was surprised when she felt his lips brush hers softly. His lips were soft and sensual, and as he slowly kissed her, her body burst into flames. Shannon ran her fingers through his hair and kissed him back, more deeply this time. Their tongues danced together like Shannon and Connor danced at a party. The deep, passionate kiss turned into sweet little pecks until Shannon was ready to open her eyes again. When she opened her eyes, she saw Connor with a big smile on his face. "You didn't expect this, did you?" Shannon asked with a smile. It was strange. She should have felt guilty, but she just didn't feel any remorse. She felt that in some way Patrick had instigated this. "Of course I didn't expect it," Connor replied. "It's just that I've wanted to kiss you since the party, and I never thought I'd actually be able to do it. What a crazy coincidence that I chose this particular park to run on this day." "I'm glad you did it," Shannon admitted. "Indeed. But what about Patrick?" Shannon kissed his forehead, slowly and intimately. "Patrick doesn't care about me, Connor, so I'm not going to care about Patrick, okay?" Connor nodded and began to kiss her again, first on the lips and then on the cheeks, leaving a trail of kisses all the way to her neck. As his tongue explored her neck, she let out a sigh of pleasure, which prompted him to reach down and caress her breasts. Her breasts were hidden under the fabric of her dress, but he could still feel the softness of her C-cup bust. As he massaged her breasts while continuing to kiss her, she felt herself getting aroused. She remembered that they were in a park and realized that although she wanted him, they needed to continue in a more suitable place. She gently removed his hand from her breast and stopped kissing. "Connor, we're at the park." Connor looked around, then covered his face with his hands. "I can't believe it, but I got so caught up in your sexuality that I actually forgot we were in public." He laughed at himself and took one of her hands in his. "I almost forgot, too," Shannon admitted. "Then I remembered where we are, not to mention I'm married, so I'll see you later, okay?" "What?" "Wait, Shannon." Shannon didn't wait to hear what Connor had to say. He was an amazing kisser and insanely handsome. He was caring and sweet, but Shannon knew it was wrong to take a lover. So, instead of being a cheater, she returned to her Volkswagen and drove home. When Shannon returned home, there were 5 text messages from Connor waiting on her phone. She stood in the dining room and began scrolling through messages. "Are you okay, Shannon? Answer me. I hope I didn't do anything wrong. Call me, okay? Shannon, I know you're married, but what just happened wasn't a mistake. Please believe this. Don't push me away, Shannon. Please don't ignore me like that. Sorry. Damn, Shannon, I'm sorry." As Shannon read each text message, she became more and more regretful, so she had to sit down at the dining room table to recover. She was sorry to Patrick for breaking her marriage vows and to Connor for misleading him. While she was feeling this regret, she was overcome by the sudden memory of Connor's lips on hers, and a wave of adrenaline filled her body. She suddenly wanted to run back to Connor and make love to him, but when she looked down at her wedding ring, she knew she couldn't do that to Patrick. She knew Connor deserved an answer since he obviously cared about her a lot, so she started typing an apologetic answer. "Connor, I'm sorry I misled you, but we both know I'm married. What happened on that bench was a mistake. I know you think otherwise, but that's how it was. Go and find someone who is single. You're handsome, it won't be difficult. Love, Shannon." Shannon hit send just as Patrick walked into the room carrying an empty plate. At that moment, she realized that she had forgotten to prepare dinner for him, and it was already late evening. She felt guilty that Patrick had to cook for himself because of her. "Patrick, I'm sorry. Patrick raised his hand to indicate that he really didn't care. "I don't care, Shen. I'm tired and I have an early rise tomorrow. Good night." He said all this without even looking at her, and she felt crushed. It was no longer a marriage. There was no love. Patrick left the kitchen and disappeared into the master bedroom, closing the door behind him. Shannon continued to sit at the dining room table, wanting to cry, but knowing there were no more tears left. Shannon eventually crept into the master bedroom, where Patrick was already fast asleep. She changed into silk pajamas and then clambered into bed next to her husband. She tried to hug him, but he pushed her away several times. After the 3rd time he pushed her away, she decided to sleep with her back turned to him, accepting the layer of loneliness that had covered her. Shannon woke up to an empty bed. Patrick had already left for work. It was Monday, which meant Shannon also had to get ready for work. She had been working as an elementary school teacher for 5 years and loved her job. She now taught 6th grade and developed a warm relationship with her students. As soon as she showered and got dressed, her phone started beeping, but she didn't have time to answer before work, or she'd be late. On the way to school, her phone rang again, and again she ignored it. Ignoring the calls and continuing to drive to school, she started thinking about Connor again and how she already missed him, even though she was married and shouldn't miss Connor. The memory of him kissing her played endlessly in her head, and she began to crave his touch again. It wasn't until the break came that Shannon had time to look at her phone and saw 4 text messages, all from Connor. "I miss you. I miss you. I miss you. Shannon, honey, did I tell you that I miss you? Well, I miss you." She read the messages and couldn't help but smile, even though deep down she knew she shouldn't. She should have deleted his number and blocked him, but she knew she couldn't cut him out of her life. Instead of doing the right thing, she answered him with 4 small but honest words. "I miss you too." A few minutes later, as expected, Connor replied to her message. "Let's meet. Text me your address and when to come, and I will be there." Shannon looked at Connor's text message and felt her heart skip a beat at the thought of him coming. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't refuse him, so she typed a text message with her address. She asked him to come any time after 7 o'clock in the evening, when Patrick would be playing poker with his friends. She pressed send and felt excitement fill her completely. She couldn't wait to see him again. It was 7 o'clock when Shannon heard a knock on the door. She opened the front door and saw Connor standing there, handsomer than ever, wearing faded blue jeans and a Nike t-shirt. His light blue eyes seemed to sparkle, and his smile made her heart beat faster. She beckoned him inside, and he followed her down the hall to the kitchen. Once they were in the kitchen, she turned to him, and seeing the desire in her eyes, he put his arm around her and pressed her against the kitchen counter. Her body pressed nicely against his, as he pressed himself against her, running his fingers through her hair. He kissed her passionately and groped her breasts, ripping off her pink top to reveal a white lace bra that hugged her breasts perfectly. It was the first time Connor had seen her naked, and the sight of her magnificent breasts immediately made him aroused. "Shannon, baby, your breasts are amazing," Connor said as he began to fondle her breasts through her sexy lace bra. "Patrick is crazy not to get excited by them." "Oh, baby, you never stop praising me." She laughed when Connor continued to kiss her, pulling off her black cotton shorts and throwing them next to her discarded blouse. They continued to kiss, Shannon's slender body pressed against the kitchen counter, in a lacy white bra and lacy panties. While he caressed her breasts and buttocks, she pulled his shirt over his head and threw it to the floor, exposing her strong, stocky breasts. "Connor, baby, you're so sexy." "You too, baby," he replied, fumbling with her bra strap hooks until her bra came unclasped. He pulled the bra straps down and pulled the white lace fabric away from her body, revealing her perfect breasts. Shannon took Connor's hand and led him into the bedroom where there was a double bed. She led him to the bed, and he turned her back to him. He hugged her and started kissing her neck while caressing her breasts, then her stomach, and finally her thighs. Then Connor put his arm around her waist, and Shannon leaned closer so she could look into those gorgeous eyes. "Connor, I need you to know something," Shannon said nervously. "What it is?" he asked, kissing her softly on the lips. "I just need you to know that this isn't just sex to me. You mean so much more to me," Shannon explained, kissing his cheek tenderly and nuzzling his neck. "I know this, child," Connor responded lovingly. "It's not just sex for me, Shannon. I really care about you and don't want this to be just another bunch. I want to be your lover. I think I'm falling in love with you." Shannon couldn't believe what Connor was telling her. Hearing him talk to her about these things gave her butterflies and made her feel weak inside. This gorgeous man had feelings for her, and she began to think that maybe she had feelings for him too. "I want to be lovers too, baby," she answered, and then they started having wild sex. Exhausted, they collapsed on top of each other and clung to each other, enjoying their love for each other. They lay in bed for at least another hour, just looking at each other and gently caressing each other with sweet kisses every now and then. Shannon thought about how deeply connected she was to Connor and how attentive he was. She couldn't help but compare Connor to Patrick. Patrick made love to her once a month, or at best once every 2 weeks. And even when he did, he seemed to want to throw himself as soon as he was done. After that, Patrick did not lie with her, hugging her and lathering her with sweet talk. Connor made her feel special, and Patrick made her feel like she was in the way. As she lay in Connor's arms, feeling his warmth and comfort surrounding her, Shannon wondered if maybe she was with the wrong man. As the night drew to a close, Shannon became aware of the timing and began to worry that Patrick would come home and find them naked together. She nudged Connor and started getting dressed. "Connor, come on," she said hastily. "Patrick should be home soon. You better go." Connor gathered his clothes scattered around the house and quickly got dressed while Shannon put on her robe. She walked him to the door and quickly ushered him outside before kissing him quickly, but passionately. "I love you," she told him as he walked to his car. "I love you too, Shannon. More than you think," he replied, turning to face her as he walked to the door of his car. Shannon and Connor stood there for a few moments, their words of devotion surrounding them. Then Connor got into his car and drove away, and for the first time in a long time, Shannon felt completely whole. After Connor left the house, Shannon returned to the guest room, going over in her mind what had just happened between them. She felt fulfilled in a way she hadn't felt in years, and was mostly glad that Connor had come. But in the far corners of her mind, a tiny spark of remorse began to form. She broke her vows. She deceived Patrick. She was unfaithful, an adulteress, a liar. She covered her face with her hands and tried not to cry. How can it be that a beautiful creature like Connor is forbidden? How can she see him again, knowing it will betray Patrick? How can she stay away from him, knowing that he makes her feel so good? Shannon heard the garage door slam shut, and she knew Patrick was back. Panic took over her body as she didn't have time to shower. Will her husband be able to feel the betrayal on her body? Will he be able to feel Connor? Patrick found her in the bedroom, smiling tiredly. His expression was one of resignation and surrender, telling Shannon that he wanted to talk and that he came in peace. "No fight, please," he seemed to be telling her. "I come in peace." Shannon beckoned him to join her on the bed, the same bed she had used for her date with Connor. Patrick moved over to her and laid his head on her shoulder. "I'm sorry for being so distant. I know you think you don't like me, but you don't." He reached out to take her hand, but the guilt made her flinch from his touch. "Shen?" Patrick searched her face for answers, but Shannon turned away so he couldn't look at her. "Shannon, I said I'm sorry. You can't punish me forever." Shannon began to cry because as much as she loved Connor, she still loved Patrick, and it hurt her to hear her husband apologizing when Shannon should have been apologizing. "It's not you, believe me. It's not you," Shannon said weakly. "Then what is it?" Patrick now sat looking at his wife with concern. "I cannot tell you," Shannon began to cry. "If I do this, then everything will end between us." There was silence after those words, as the truth of what was implied sank palpably into the room. Patrick thought for a moment about the obvious reasons why a marriage might end, and cheating was the first thing that came to his mind. "Why? Why do we have to break up, Shannon?" Each word came out slowly and deliberately. Shannon was silent for a moment before she let out a small and defeated response. "Yes." She turned to look at her husband and found him leaning over the bed, covering his face with his hands. His body trembled with quiet sobs. Shannon had never seen Patrick so upset before, and it was heartbreaking to know that she had done this to him. She tried to touch his shoulder in a desperate attempt to comfort him, but he brutally pushed her away. "Patrick, look at me. Please," she begged. He turned to look at her, and there was only pure anger in his tear-streaked face. "To hell with you!" he barked. "Don't talk to me like that," she begged. "I know you're angry and I'm sorry, but I really felt alone. You weren't there when I needed you. I wasn't getting what I needed. Patrick snorted and shook his head in disbelief. "Needs? Needs? Shannon, Do you think you're the only one with needs? You think you're the only one capable of cheating? Just for the record, honey, I have a cute little ass in the hospital that I've been sleeping with for months now. So, go and have your little romance. I'm already tired of looking at your boring body." He said it all so quickly, as if the words were poison that he needed to get out of himself before they poisoned him. He left the room, slamming the door behind him. Shannon heard Patrick start the car and drive out of the garage. And just like that, Shannon was left alone in the house again. Shannon had never felt such rage in her life before. It had been 3 days since Patrick left, and she had never heard from or seen him. Perhaps he was staying with a friend or with his parents. Perhaps he was with his mistress from work. She didn't know for sure what happened to Patrick, but she did know that she was seething with anger because of his hurtful words. With half a plate of lasagna and a glass of wine in front of her, she dialed Natalie, the only constant in her life that she could rely on. "What happened, Shen?" Natalie said after 4 rings. "I cheated on Patrick," Shannon said without any preamble. Natalie whistled, showing that she thought it was a big deal. "Okay, well then." "Really?" "Yes," Shannon replied. "I only want the truth. Tell me the truth." "I was half expecting this, baby. He's been neglecting you for years. Who is this guy?" "Nobody. It was nothing. Once, never again. I'm married to a man who abuses you. You deserve better. Who did you sleep with?" Shannon sighed. There was no point in hiding anything from her best friend. "Connor. He was at the party. Nat, I know I shouldn't say this, but he's so sweet and caring and... Damn, it was the best sex I've ever had." Shannon heard laughter from the other end of the phone. "Listen," Nat replied. "I know you made vows, and I'm all about honesty, but I'm actually glad. I'm glad you're finally taking care of yourself." "Well, Patrick takes care of himself too." "What do you mean?" "When I told him I cheated, he said he cheated on me too, with someone from work." "Well, you see, there's nothing to worry about," Shannon concluded, as if she had just found the solution to a puzzle. "Nat, it's not that simple. We shouldn't cheat on each other. I want Patrick to change and give me what Connor gave me." "This may never happen, dear," Shannon noted cautiously. "Patrick has been like this for years. Maybe it's best to just leave." It was painful to hear this from Natalie. Shannon still wanted to save her marriage, even if it was now badly damaged. "I don't want to leave, Nat." "I know," Natalie replied comfortingly. "I just want you to know that this may be your only option. Whatever it is, I know you, Shannon. You are strong. You will get through this." They talked a little more until Shannon drank her wine, and when she hung up, she had a small smile on her face. The immediate anger caused by Patrick's comment began to subside, Natalie's words comforting her and the wine numbing the pain. She heard a knock on the door and went to answer it, expecting that it might be Patrick wanting to make peace. But when did Patrick knock on the door? She opened the door to see Connor standing there, wearing pants and a button-down shirt. He didn't give her time to answer. He pushed her back into the hallway, kissing her passionately, caressing her thighs and breasts. His movements were rough, with a strong need to devour her. Shannon pushed him away and looked at her lover. "He cheated on me, baby," she said as fresh tears began to fall. "I know I'm no better for what happened that night, but that bastard was sleeping with someone at work for months. He called me boring, Connor placed a gentle finger on her lips. "Shh," he said gently. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. The guy who's been neglecting you all this time is cheating. And you're not bad, okay? You're a sexy goddess who has needs, and you were determined enough to satisfy them. That bastard wants to call, 'Are you boring?' Well then, let's show him how exciting you can be." He buried his face in her neck, kissing her bare skin, lifting the dress over her head, and tossing it to the ground so that she stood in black cotton panties and a matching bra. "Why don't you come into the master bedroom with me? Why don't you show me how a real man makes love to his wife?" She walked towards the master bedroom, looking back at Connor with a flirtatious smile, beckoning him to follow her. He followed her into a huge room with an elegant 4-poster king-size bed, that Patrick and Shannon had chosen years ago. As they stood in front of the bed, Shannon placed her hand on one of the bedposts. "We bought this bed when we first moved here. We made love on it so many times, tried to get pregnant on it so many times. It's our marital bed, only Patrick and I have slept on it so far. Until now," Connor added with a sly smile. "I hate him for what he did to you, Shannon. He took a beautiful rose and deprived it of its water. He locked you away. Shen, let me love you. Let me set you free." He gently took her face in his hands and kissed her slowly. A familiar rush of blood swept through Shannon. "We are going to pretend that you are Patrick, you are my husband. This is our wedding night. Show me how a real man makes love to his wife. Take me in our marital bed, take Patrick's place, and show me that you can have better sex than him." Connor didn't need to be told twice. He pushed Shannon onto the bed, her slender body spread out on the mattress. They had gentle sex several times during the night. When they finished, Connor had to leave, but before he could reach the door, she hugged him tightly. "I really love you. You know that, right?" Her words came out almost pleadingly, desperate for him to understand how she felt, desperate so that he wouldn't be angry with her. Connor nodded. "Of course I know that, Shannon. We couldn't have made love the way we did without knowing that." Shannon watched as Connor drove away, feeling a strange urge to run after him and beg him to take her with him. He was all she needed, but as his car disappeared around the corner, she looked down at her wedding ring. Now, standing in the driveway, looking at her ring, she reminded herself that she was still married and that she needed to talk to Patrick about their future. With Connor gone, there was no reason to stay in the driveway, so she returned to the house and waited for Patrick to come home. 3 hours later, she heard Patrick's car pull into the driveway. She knew he wouldn't be gone long. He was the type of person who craved the comfort of his home. Even during their heated arguments, he returned home quite quickly, if only for the sake of his television. Patrick entered the living room with a deep sigh. Shannon was sitting at the table in the living room, a glass of wine and a nearly empty bottle of red in front of her. He looked at her with an instinctive feeling of foreboding. Shannon seemed too calm for his liking. She sat confidently and relaxed, as if her thoughts were already decided. She was wearing leggings and a loose tunic. Her hair was down, just the way he liked it best. However, this time it was obvious that she had not prepared herself in this way for him. This time, she was doing something for herself. Shannon took a sip of wine and silently motioned for him to sit down. He sat down opposite her, suddenly feeling awkward in his own home. "Shannon, listen," he began. "I lied about the nurse." Shannon rolled her eyes at this admission. "Well, I didn't lie about Connor." Connor, how he hated that name. I know you didn't lie. That's why I lied about the nurse. I couldn't bear the thought of another man giving you pleasure. It destroyed my pride. It hurt so much, and I just wanted to hurt you. I wanted this nurse so bad, and I wanted you to think that I could have her." Shannon shook her head, confused. "It's clear," she muttered with indifference. "Listen, Patrick, I know why you said it. I'm sorry I hurt you, but Connor happened because you neglected me. I needed love from somewhere, and you weren't giving it to me. We're having sex. Rare. You don't stay to hug me when Connor—" "No!" Patrick stood up abruptly and raised his hand to stop her. "For God's sake, not in my house. You're not going to tell me how he's better than me. Not here, where we eat our dinner together." Okay," she replied. At her soothing tone, he sat down again. "Just let me say it. It's not all my fault. You're moving away from me. I'm sorry, I still love you. I'll be a better person." His eyes were downcast, and his words were quiet and humble, his tone not quite matching the man Shannon knew. I know. You're sorry, and you want to fix it, but I think I need space. I need time." Patrick looked at his wife, and Shannon saw the clear panic on his face. "Wait, what?" "Just a few months. I need to figure out what I want. It's not necessarily goodbye," she added, to soothe his panic. Patrick opened his mouth to argue, and then decided against it. "Okay, then I guess I'll go see my parents for a while." As Patrick went into the master bedroom to pack, Shannon felt a weight lift off her shoulders, a weight she didn't even know she had. Patrick's bags were already in his car for half an hour. Shannon came to hug him, and at that moment, Patrick kissed her on the lips. She automatically tilted her head and the kiss awkwardly touched her cheek. Shannon sensed that there was lingering disappointment and hostility between them. "Take care of yourself," she said with a slight smile, hoping her words didn't sound too final. "See you soon," he answered, getting into the car. Unlike Connor, Shannon didn't watch the man leave. She hurried back into the house and began to cry. It was only when she settled down on the sofa and covered herself with a blanket that she realized that these were actually tears of relief. Shannon spent the next month alone, thinking about everything that happened after the party. She realized that she had spent the last 8 years devoting herself to Patrick and had never thought about life without him. Now that they were apart, she was shocked to find that she didn't miss him. Although she missed Connor, she still put off talking to him. She knew she should have called him weeks ago, that she got the time she wanted. But making that call meant breaking at least one person's heart. She didn't want to break anyone's heart. She just wanted love to be simple. The thought of her heartbreak suddenly made her feel sick to her stomach, so sick that she felt nausea rising in her throat. She ran to the bathroom and vomited into the toilet. These people were going to be the death of her. She showered and rinsed the sour taste of vomit from her mouth, remembering the last time she and Patrick had made love in that shower. She noticed that she recalled this experience with complete detachment. It was like she was watching an old, familiar movie that was once her favorite until she outgrew it. She wrapped herself in a robe and walked from room to room, looking at all the photos of her and Patrick, smiling in the car on the first date, drinking champagne at the engagement party, cutting the wedding cake. The same feeling was there. Cold detachment arising from neglect, from falling out of love. A harsh reality seeped into her bonus. Heavy and final. Shannon no longer loved Patrick. Her marriage did indeed fall apart. One phone call, a glass of wine, and 3/4 of an hour later, Patrick and Shannon were sitting face to face on the master bed. With a feeling of guilt, Shannon remembered the hot sex that she and Connor had on this very bed. But this moment wasn't about her and Connor. It was about her and Patrick. Patrick took her hand, a look of pure need and desperation on his face. "I can see it in your eyes, Shan. I know what you're going to say. Please don't say that. Please don't say you want to leave." Shannon looked away from her husband, the man she had loved for 8 years and who now seemed a stranger to her. "I'm sorry, Patrick. I know you don't want to hear this, but I have to say it. I just don't love you anymore, at least not the way I used to." "No," he answered quietly, his heart breaking around the two of them. "Yes," Shannon objected. "You have to believe it, Patrick. You have to accept it so we can both move on. It's over. This marriage is over." "I can change," he begged. "No, Patrick, you can't and you won't. You say you'll change, but in 12 months we'll be having the same conversation. We just don't work anymore." Patrick shook his head in disbelief, unable to comprehend the truth. Shannon put a hand on his shoulder, trying to comfort the man who had occupied her life for so long, but Patrick shook it off in a sudden outburst of anger that shocked her. Patrick stood up and walked toward the bedroom door, but Shannon followed him, holding out her hand and forcing him to look at her. "Please, Patrick." "Fuck off, you cheating bitch." He spat, throwing her off of him, and she landed awkwardly on the bed. As he watched her fall, he noticed an expression of deep pain on her face. She looked at him, begging him to understand. Looking at his wife, he realized how beautiful she had always been, and realized how much he was missing. What if he doesn't, not mind, let her go? He had to make her see the light. He had to make her want him again. Shannon's heart ached for him. Seeing Patrick in pain was painful. Lying on the bed where she had fallen, she looked into Patrick's eyes and saw a sea of pain. Then she began to see new emotions appear on his face. She suddenly realized that what she was seeing was an expression of pure hunger. Patrick walked over to the bed where his beautiful wife lay. He towered over her slender figure and grabbed both of her arms, pinning her to the soft mattress. His grip on her small body was rough and strong, and the cruelty of his touch turned her on in a strange way. Patrick was also excited by this. "Pat," Shannon began, but Patrick rudely interrupted her. "Shut up," he growled, lifting Shannon's skirt to reveal her blue cotton panties. He pulled off her underwear and began to have rough sex with her. Shannon loved it, even though she tried to stop Patrick. When they finished, Patrick got dressed in a hurry and left her there. After Patrick left, Shannon took a hot bath to wash her husband off of her. She realized as she rubbed her skin that she had just had sex with Patrick for the last time. She knew where his anger came from. She knew that her betrayal had emasculated him, and that this rough, animal contact was a vindictive attempt to reclaim his masculinity. She understood this, and part of her was thrilled to see him so aroused and eager to take her to death, but a deeper part of her felt disgust and anger. After her bath, she felt that familiar feeling of nausea in her stomach. She threw up in the bathroom, realizing that she had already been sick earlier that day. She went to bed with a hot cup of tea, but soon after she lay down to rest, the nausea returned. When she vomited for the third time, she realized that it was strange for her to be sick. She was very healthy and rarely even caught a cold. With horror, she realized what could have caused her nausea. 3 days later, Shannon found herself driving down an unfamiliar street, her eyes scanning the numbers on the mailboxes, excitement fluttering in her stomach. Finally, she found the house she needed, a large 2-story house, lined with dark red brick. Here he is, leaning over the second-floor balcony, lost in thought. "Does he think about me?" Shannon thought. She parked in the driveway, but he was so lost in thought that he didn't notice her at first. As she got out of the car, the slam of the car door brought him out of his thoughts, and he smiled at the sight of her. "Shannon, wait there." He disappeared from the balcony, and a few minutes later, he came down the stairs and opened the front door. He hugged her and kissed her, wrapping his arm around her back, his fingers sneaking under her outerwear, sliding along the back of her bra. "Let me come in?" she asked, knowing the answer. "Of course, come in." He pulled her inside and pressed her against the wall at the entrance. He was already excited. Shannon felt her arousal grow as Connor's body pressed against hers. She didn't see him for a month, but she came on a mission. She needed to talk to him. "Connor, wait. Baby, I've been waiting a month." He unbuttoned his jeans and began to pull them off, but Shannon pulled them back. "Connor, stop!" Shannon shouted. Connor paused, feeling his excitement fade at her categorical refusal. "Connor, I didn't come to have sex." Connor looked down, realizing that Shannon had made her choice, and it wasn't him. She didn't come to make love, she came to end their relationship. "Oh, got it." Frustrated, Connor left Shannon in the hallway and moved into the adjacent living room. He collapsed on one of the sofas and covered his face with his hands. Shannon followed him and sat down next to him. "No, you don't understand," Shannon answered. Connor looked up at her, confused. Suddenly, Shannon didn't know how to tell him, afraid of his reaction, afraid that she would be alone in this. So instead of speaking, she opened her purse and took out the pregnancy test she had been staring at for the past 2 days. She handed it to him and watched as shock crossed his face when he noticed the black plus. "Shen, you—" She nodded. "Patrick?" She shook her head. "No, baby, not Patrick's. Yours." Shannon allowed him to experience the realization of parenthood. She watched as his eyes widened in shock, and then slowly a smile appeared on his face. "We're having a baby," he whispered with delight and surprise, and leaned toward Shannon, kissing her so deeply that he felt himself getting aroused again. "Are you happy?" she asked between kisses as he took off her top. "I am very happy. I love you." "And I love you too," said Connor. "How much?" "So," he said, removing her bra and pinching her breasts. "Move in with me, baby," he said. "Move in with me and be my family." "We will be so good together," he persuaded. kissing her. "Raising our child will be so wonderful," he continued, caressing her tenderly. "Wouldn't that be amazing?" he whispered. "We'll be perfect, won't we? We'll be so in love. Move in with me, please, baby. Will you move in with me? Will you leave him so that I can be the father of my child?" "Yes," Shannon exclaimed. He stood up from the couch and took Shannon's hand, leading her away from the couch and living room and into the hall. The room was filled with pictures of Connor with his family and friends. Shannon felt a shiver run through her as she realized that soon this house would be filled with pictures of her and Connor, as well as pictures of the baby. Connor led her to the nearest bedroom, a spare room at the end of the hallway. It was a large room with a double bed, which was very cozy. Connor closed the door behind them and then rushed at Shannon, hugging her. He picked her up and she wrapped her legs around his waist as their tongues danced erotically together. He carried her to the bed and carefully placed her body in front of him. They made love. Afterwards, they lay in an embrace, the comfort and safety of his embrace lulling her into a relaxing sleep. Her misty eyes looked at him expectantly. "What is it, sweetie?" she asked, laying her sleepy head on his chest. He smiled at her, brushing stray strands of hair from her face. She looked so sweet, looking at him with such anticipation. He couldn't believe that Patrick would let such a goddess go. He couldn't believe that Shannon belonged to him. "I was just thinking about how nice this room could look." Shannon followed Connor's gaze as he scanned each wall. She didn't know what he was thinking, but he seemed to be planning something. "Oh, yes?" she answered and sat up on the bed, trying to understand what he was talking about. "I think we should paint the walls. White walls just won't do." He put his hand on his chin, an exaggerated, mocking expression on his face, as if the view of this particular room had suddenly become the most important thing. Shannon laughed at Connor's sudden interest in the room's interior design. "Okay, then why did you suddenly want to redecorate this room?" she asked, as her lover continued to stare at the walls, imagining things she couldn't see. "Well," he replied, "I just think this room would be perfect as a nursery." The last word sounded softly between them. Her heart warmed at his words and she smiled, her face brightening at the thought of this room becoming a nursery for their beautiful child. "Do you like it?" he asked. She nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I love the idea of our little miracle sleeping here." "Me too," he agreed, his hand reaching towards her stomach. Shannon placed her hand on his, and together they held their little creation and began discussing plans for the nursery. "I wonder if it will be a girl or a boy," she said, looking at her belly. "I don't care as long as it's ours." Connor replied. Shannon kissed him deeply. "Of course it will be ours. It will forever be ours. Our little angel, the icing on the beautiful cake of our perfect little family." "What a delicious cake," he muttered as Shannon pressed herself against him. They lay there all day, huddled together and discussing the names of the children. As Connor played with her hair and came up with ridiculously terrible names for her to laugh at, Shannon was overcome with a deep sense of joy and gratitude. Here she was in the arms of a man who loved her so much, both sexually and emotionally. She was the happiest she had ever been in her entire life. After years of longing to become a mother and losing hope of ever getting pregnant, she became one by pure chance, and the father was a sex god who wanted to be her partner for life. Shannon cheated on her husband. She ruined her marriage bed, irrevocably damaging the trust she and Patrick had built. But her adulterous behavior formed a bond with another man, a bond far deeper than any she had experienced before. Shannon, of course, ruined the marriage bed, but ultimately it led her to another bed, much warmer and safer than the previous one. Without realizing it, Connor showed her a way out of a toxic marriage full of hurt and neglect. Connor showed her what it meant to truly love and be loved. He showed her that there was still hope and joy in life. Connor's arms were cradling her naked body, a tiny baby heart was beating in her stomach, and Shannon knew she had found her way home. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.